Welcome to the Story Partners Podcast. I'm Annie Manus, and we're so glad you found us.
A lot of times it would be in the middle of the night when we would get the call to go pick them up. And so they were sleep deprived. They had been on a bus for hours coming up from the detention center. The staff at the center was wonderful, orienting them and trying to explain to them what was happening, but they were very disoriented. Sometimes I would have the children with me for several days or a week, and I would talk about something in Waco, and they would say, "Wait, this is America?" And I would say, "Yes, we're in America. We have been for the last week." But they had been through so many countries and so many systems and things that they were disoriented.
We can't wait for you to hear this episode of our friends Brian and Stephanie Claus. Stephanie was actually my college roommate, and we have been friends with these guys for many decades now. They are some of the kindest, sweetest people that we know. In today's episode, we'll get to hear about their personal, firsthand experience taking care of some of the most vulnerable kids in our world today. We learned so much from them in their interview. If I'm honest, I just really didn't understand a lot of what has been happening at the border, and hearing their stories has helped me to grow in compassion toward the situation. And it's moved me away from sheer statistics to the humanity of the issue. It's helped me to get more of a glimpse of God's heart for these kids. This is Season 2, Episode 7, Children Crossing.
Unaccompanied minors are typically kids that are coming up from Latin America, or really anywhere, but in this case, they're coming across the southern border of the U.S. from Mexico.
In 2022, approximately 150,000 children under the age of 18 crossed our borders. They come for a variety of different reasons. Sometimes the parents may already be in the U.S. and have been working in the U.S. and sending home funds, and they've been able to save up enough money to pay for their child to come up to join them.
They're leaving immense poverty, famine, gang violence, political upheaval.
It's basically families who are trying to find a safer situation for their children because the places that they are from feel too dangerous for them. Sometimes they're traveling the whole way all by themselves. Sometimes they're traveling in caravans with other families. Sometimes they have a friend or someone who's paid to help them travel up from their home country into the U.S. or to the U.S. border. Either they're hiring somebody to help take the kids up, or a family member is helping them come up. It is not cheap to send a child up to cross the border because most of these children are coming from Central America. They have to make that whole journey. And so many times the human smuggler is part of organized crime, and a lot of times what they charge is a pretty exorbitant price, and their main goal is more financial gain than it is the safety of the people that they are smuggling across the border. The journey is very dangerous. Every year there are immigrants who pass away in the deserts along the border areas, and sometimes there are reports where trucks are found with immigrants who have not had access to food and water, and some of them have passed away during that journey. One little girl told me that she had crossed the river by herself and nobody was there to hold her hand. She was tiny, 5 or 6. And another girl told me that her father had been killed by the gangs. They would tell me how they would had to cross the desert on their own with thorns going through their shoes. And, a lot of times that part of the journey, it's just them, like a group of children crossing on their own.
They realize that if they can't make it to America, that the likelihood that they will die or be pulled into some kind of gang activity or cartel is almost certain. And so it's worth risking even the dangerous trek to the States and even the chance of getting turned back or not even being able to make it across and getting stuck in Mexico, because what awaits them at home is not worth staying for.
So it's hard to understand, with all the dangers along the way, why a parent would send their child, sometimes alone, to cross our borders. But I think at the end of the day, the situations that they are in their home country feel more dangerous to them than that journey across our border, even though it carries a lot of risk.
They're coming across the southern border of the U.S. from Mexico, and then they get apprehended there by ICE, which is our Border Patrol, the Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement Agency. And we had one little girl, they tried 4 times or 3 or 4 times to come across, and every time ICE would just send them back into Mexico. So the last time, the mom sent the little girl by herself with a coyote across, because they knew that the U.S. border wouldn't turn away an unaccompanied minor.
I think it's kind of an area called Piedras Negras that they would come across, and they would cross the Rio Grande, but it was a shallower part, and it was an area where I believe there's a lot of ICE presence who would pick up the kids and then take them to a detention center. And they're only supposed to stay at the detention center a few days if they're children. So they call the children 12 and under to be tender age children, and after a few days at the detention center processing them, then they would bring them up to our program, and then they would give them some clothes and try to find out as much as they could about their medical history and who their sponsor would be, and then they would place them in our home as a foster child for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. The longest placement we had was almost 4 months, but most of them were much shorter, just 2 or 3 weeks. So I think as a kid, I always knew that I wanted to be a doctor, and I felt like that was the Lord's calling. And then as I started walking closer with the Lord in probably junior high and high school, I really felt like the Lord was calling me to be a missionary. And so that had always kind of been my plan. You know, growing up, everyone around me was missionaries. My parents had missionaries coming to our house all the time, and so I always kind of thought that that's what that would look like, that I would go and be a long-term missionary. I chose to go to John Brown University, which is a small Christian college, and they did like a summer early registration orientation weekend.
My mom was a missionary kid in Guatemala, and Steph's mom was a missionary kid in Mexico, and they ended up going to the same boarding school in Guatemala. And they hadn't seen each other in 25 plus years, and we both ended up on the campus of John Brown University for kind of the orientation weekend during the summertime. And I think Judy recognized my mom and yelled to her across the quad or whatever, and they ended up reconnecting, and we ended up having lunch together that day at the cafeteria.
I was doing the prayer ministry on campus, and I went up to the student ministry offices to drop off the prayer cards, and I took them there and ran into Brian, and we knew each other a little better at this point because our friend groups had kind of converged a little bit. And I was there with the prayer cards, and he asked me on a date, and I just remember staring at him for like a good 30 seconds before saying yes, because I had not gone on a date. I had never dated anybody, so I was shocked. But we went on a few dates and kind of hung out together, and he wanted to do missions, which was a big qualification, that I really wanted to marry somebody who was mission-minded. And I felt from very early on that he was somebody I could trust and somebody who really loved Jesus. And so we ended up dating for 3.5 years before we got married, most of that long distance while he was in Costa Rica. And then we moved to Waco for my residency, which was 3 years long.
We know we want to do missions long term. What does that look like? And Stephanie had just finished residency, and so she was starting to work her normal clinical job But we also realized we had a lot of school debt. And so we were trying to figure out, like, well, we can't, no mission organization is going to take us with over $100,000 in debt. And what does that look like to be involved missionally now until we are more financially able to go overseas?
I started working for the same clinic system that my residency is connected with, and it basically it's called a federally qualified health center. It's a clinic system that serves the underserved of the community. So during that time, Brian transitioned from his job in Costa Rica to work for Unbound, which is an organization that started out of our church to help fight human trafficking.
That ministry was just growing and growing, and I felt just such a calling to what that was, that we both just felt like, wow, what we're doing is so important and so needed, and it feels like ministry. It took us a little over 5 years to pay off the medical school debt.
And then we started praying about going overseas.
We started praying, okay, God, what do you want us to do? Where should we go? Or is this the time? Are you speaking anything? And we just never really heard a firm, like, this is where I want you to go, or this is what I want you to do. And
we just really felt like what we were doing here was very missional and very much using our giftings and what God had called us to.
Maybe we don't need to go overseas full time. We can accomplish maybe even more than what we would if we were someplace.
We didn't feel like God was opening any doors, and we felt like God was saying to stay and to do what we were doing here. I have a lot of Latino patients who are oftentimes undocumented residents who live here and work regular jobs but don't have benefits through their job and wouldn't qualify for state resources.
So she interfaces with so many people that are Spanish speaking, are the poorest of the poor, and she speaks Spanish 40 to 50% of her day, and is really just loving on and serving those that are the least of these in our community.
Our patient population is primarily Medicaid, which is going to be 200% poverty line or below, Medicare, and then uninsured patients. I have always wanted 4 children, and so after we had our 4th, maybe 3-4 years, after Brian had his vasectomy, I remember being in the car and praying and just saying to God, like, Lord, I think I have more mothering left to do. And I think it was only a few months after that we heard about this opportunity to foster unaccompanied migrant children.
We said, how do we get our kids more involved? Because this is the thing that Stephanie and I go to every day at our work, but they're not coming with us. And so we wanted to get them more involved. We've taken them on a few Unbound international trips to serve in the Dominican or Puerto Rico or some other places. But on the day-to-day, how can we get them more involved?
I think when we started this, our youngest was 4, and so ranging from 4 to 11 at the time. And those are hard years to figure out how to help involve your children in service and model that for them. But we wanted to do something where they could participate and be missional too, and learn what service looks like.
So I think it was maybe late 2019 or early 2019, some folks in our church said, hey, there's a center going to be opening up in Waco that takes in foster kids from other countries, and they're kind of like host homes, families that need to take care of these kids until they can get placed with their parents or families or relatives or a sponsor.
We had 2 different friends, one who had heard about it from other places, and another friend and colleague of mine who had started fostering through this organization.
I think we were just a little overwhelmed with life and where we're at with the little kids. We had smaller kids at the time, and so we just didn't do anything right at that moment. But then the pandemic hit, everything shut down. The center was still running because they still had people coming across the border, but it was just harder to get plugged in because of the situation. And so when that finally lifted, it was the spring of 21 that we re-engaged. They were looking for more families. The family that the couple that Steph works with said, hey, they're looking for more people. I think you guys should do it. They're going to be hosting another training. And so we prayed about it and we said, yeah, let's do it. Our kids were super excited. They were all on board, and we really didn't know what we were stepping into. And I think we wish we'd been a little bit more prepared.
A lot of times it would be in the middle of the night when we would get the call to go pick them up. And so they were sleep deprived. You know, they had been on a bus for hours coming up from the detention center. The staff at the center was wonderful, you know, orienting them and trying to explain to them what was happening, but they were very disoriented. You know, sometimes I would have the children with me for several days or a week, and I would talk about something in Waco, and they would say, wait, this is America? And I would say, yes, we're in America. We have been for the last week. But they had been through so many countries and so many systems and things that they were disoriented. So when I would pick them up at the center, it just depended. The first child we got, he was so traumatized. He was only 4, and he had actually been separated from the family member that he was very bonded to and who had taken him. And for some reason, ICE had separated him from his parent even after crossing the border. And so he was very traumatized. And here I show up, and I'm blonde and I'm very white, and it was raining, pouring rain, and I felt so bad because he didn't understand why I'm taking him to my home.
He came and was crying and hitting us, and just didn't want to be with us. Kept asking for his dad, and we were just like, well, we don't know what to do, and we're calling our friends that were doing it, asking like, is this normal, and what are we supposed to do, and just completely out of our element.
I just remember thinking, I think after he had bitten me, that this was different than I had expected it was going to be. He wouldn't take his shoes off for about a week. He slept in his shoes, and if we tried to change his clothes or give him a bath, he became very combative because he just did not feel safe at the beginning. And
he was 30 pounds, was just tiny, malnutritioned, had the parasites, couldn't keep any nutrition in him because of that. And he was barely surviving. I mean, he was just down to nothing, mostly bones. He came with severe diarrhea, and we took him to the soccer game the next morning to watch Isaiah play soccer, and ended up having a huge accident at the park, and we had to go into the men's bathroom, and I'm in there trying to change him on the sink, and Stephanie's coming in, and other men are coming into the bathroom, and they're like doing a double take because they see her in there, and she's apologizing, and everyone's like, no, it's okay. I mean, this looks like a really hard situation, and you guys are doing great. And we had no idea what we were doing, just trying to get him cleaned up, and he's sobbing,
and it took him a couple weeks to feel safe in our home and not to want to run away and leave.
You don't know what helps, and you don't have them very long, so you don't have a lot of time to figure that out, whether that's story or a certain show or what it is they need, what comforts them. And so a lot of time, it felt like we were in that a mode of just like constant prayer, like not necessarily out loud, but just like, Jesus, help me. What do I need to do? Like, what does this child need? How do we meet them where they're at? How do we love them? How do we care for them? Show me what's going on that I can't see, that they're either not telling me because they don't know how to say it because they're too young. They're not ours long term, but they're ours now, and we need wisdom to know what we can do to help them. And so I think we spent a lot of time praying just for wisdom and grace to know, okay, what do we need? What do they need? And just helping them not to be, praying that they wouldn't be afraid and fearful. And even once they got over the initial trauma of being with us, there were still lots of questions and things that they weren't sure about and fearful of, and to just reassure them that God has a plan for them, for their lives, just to pray with them and to encourage them and tell them that your mom, your dad, or your abuela or papa or whoever it is that is waiting for them. Like, they care for them, they love them, and that they want the best for them, and they didn't abandon them. We're just a stopping place for you on the way to family again. We're not keeping you. We're just loving you while you're here, and then sending you on your way, hopefully better than when we found you. The first kid we got, once he got through the trauma and the fear of being left and forgotten, and realized that we weren't keeping him forever, he really started to open up and became one of the just joyful little kids, a smile on his face, and one of those kids that just worked his way into our hearts. And if he didn't have a family to go back to, I would have adopted him in a heartbeat.
It has been so beautiful watching our children love on these children, because the immigrant children come into our home many times so afraid, and then they see our kids and they just sit down and start playing with other kids, because kids know that other kids are safe, and a new adult is not necessarily safe. But a new child who is also pretty kind and loving is a safe place. And so I felt that our foster children have been able to acclimate and feel at home in our home much faster because of our children. Our kids are fluent in Uno Spanish. They know all the numbers and colors and everything. They can say, vámonos afuera, let's go outside to play. The little things that they need to say. We had one little girl who came to us very sick, and my daughter, who is 8, just sat by her bed. I think we were hosting something that night, and so I was kind of torn between two places, but my daughter Elena was like, "It's okay, Mom, I'll sit with her," and sat by her bed, came and told me that she had gotten up and vomited, and she had helped her to the toilet and helped her back and cleaned her up. Obviously I'm going up and checking on her and caring for her too, but my daughter took such ownership over this little girl who was really ill when she came to us. And even, with the foster rules, they really are supposed to sleep in the same room as a child. They're not allowed to sleep in the same room as an adult. And so she was up there in the girls' room, and Elena would come and get me every time she got up because she wasn't feeling well or was coughing too hard, so that I could come up and give her some medicine or comfort her.
We had friends that would rally behind us and drop off a meal or bring over kids' clothes that had gotten grown out of, perfectly good, but just it was going to go to Goodwill, so they dropped it off at our house. And so it was neat because it felt like we got to involve people that said, I could never do that. And I'd always have to remind them that you are doing it. Like, you're a part of this beautiful work that we're doing together, and we couldn't do it without you. Because it was just such a incredible picture of the gospel and of what God was doing in community all around the world. Like, we're there for one another.
I would check in with the kids between placements and also ask them, how are you doing? How is this for you? Because it was a cost for them. And at first I would ask them, how are you doing? How's fostering? And they would say, oh, it's great. And then I would say, well, what about the hard parts? What about when I can't tuck you in at night because I'm sitting up with a foster child? Or what about where, in the evenings when we would usually maybe spend time with you, we're dealing with some behavior issues with the foster kids? Or what about when we can't maybe go to friend's house over a weekend because we got a new placement and they're still adjusting, what about those parts? And then they would say, oh yeah, it is a little bit hard sometimes. And they would kind of open up about the things that were more difficult. And I would just try to tell them, those are valid things. And, you guys are making sacrifices too. And if you feel like we need more time, we want to give you that. But I think most of the time they just experience so much of the joy of it, of connecting with these children, that they still really wanted to keep fostering. I had these 2 girls that came from different countries, and They didn't give us very many clothes, and so I would take them to the kind of like a nicer secondhand clothing store and let them pick out. And they were, one was 8 and one was 10 or 11, I want to say. And so I let them pick out, 5 different outfits, and they just had a blast. They just kept telling me what an amazing store this was that I had brought them to, and they picked out exactly, what they wanted. And then every night they would lay out their clothes and ask me if I thought that these outfits went well together, because they were so excited about the outfits, It's been such a joy to get to know these children, just to hear their stories and to learn their little quirks and personalities, and to just fall in love with them, and some of them are easy to love and some of them are not as easy to love, and some of them have a lot of rough edges and some of them just a few, and yet you can just see the beauty that God creates each human life with, that there is something so precious and unique about every single life that He has created. I believe that God knows each person, and He is just so beautiful the way God created people, and that He made our world so diverse. Whether you're looking at nature or cultures or countries or any aspect of creation that you look at, there's just so much diversity, and that is the beauty of our world, and that is the image of God. And I think that God made each of these children in His image with a plan and a purpose for them to know Him and to know His love, and to walk in that assurance of His love. And so I would pray that over them every night. This one sweet, sweet girl who came across with her younger sister, I think she was 10 and her little sister was 4, and she just carried the weight of the world taking care of this little sister of hers. And on top of that, they had to cross on their own, but their mom was crossing with a coyote, and she was so worried about her mom's safety. And I would find her up in her room crying, and what do you say to a girl who's crying because she's worried that her mom might die in the desert crossing with a coyote? I mean, I didn't know what to say, because I can't guarantee her that nothing is going to happen to her mom, other than to say, we love you, God is with you, God is with your mom, He will be with you. And that is kind of what I would pray over these children every night, that you are loved by God, that you're made in the image of God, that He has a purpose and a plan for your life, and that He will always be with you and He will always guide you. So that little girl, carrying the weight of the world and just getting to allow her to not be a parent to her little sister, tell her, like, it's okay, we've got her. You don't have to worry about her, and let her just, play in the pool and splash around. And then the day before she left, we would give all the children a Jesus Storybook Bible in English and Spanish before they leave. And I gave it to her, and I just talked to her, and I just said, I think that you carry everything, and you're trying to do everything and be responsible and do everything right, and you carry that weight. And I talked to her about my own journey, and I said, I've been there, and it always ends in failure. It always ends in disappointment, but you don't have to carry this weight. God will carry this weight for you. God does not expect you to be perfect. It's okay for you to just be a kid.
It got really hard to say goodbye, because they were doing life with us. Whatever we did, they did it with us. We had people telling us, you all need to take longer breaks between kids. And we were just like, we can't. Like, there's so many kids that need placement, and we absolutely love it. Like, it's, on one hand, it's super hard and challenging, and it's like, it takes a lot out of you and you're exhausted. And then on the other hand, it's like, it's so worth it. Just love on them, disciple them, care for them. Like, it brought so much joy to us and our kids that we just didn't want to take a break.
Some children would be so homesick and we would be with them every night for hours while they cried for maybe a week or two, and other children wouldn't shed a tear. And I almost felt more worried about the children who weren't traumatized at all and weren't scared at all to be put into this completely foreign environment. Like, what has your life been like before this, that this doesn't feel scary for you?
You just don't realize the amount of like secondary trauma that's going to come into your home because of the stuff that these kids have experienced and that they're not fully understanding and that they're having to process and or working through, and then that gets like dumped on you as a foster parent and family as you're trying to help them. And so we had some really hard situations.
It's one thing to go to work and experience trauma, because I do. I hear people's stories and I see some hard things in clinic. But it's different to invite that trauma into your home. That's your safe space. I think that when we started fostering and started looking into fostering, I didn't necessarily think of it as being a risk for our family or our own children. I just thought about loving on these kids that needed a safe place. But there have been things that have been hard, and we had a situation that was really hard for our whole family and affected us each in different ways. And I think after that situation, I think that our social workers really thought that we would stop fostering. It really opened our eyes to how much darkness there is in our world and how much that darkness can affect even children, children who should be shielded from things that are hard and dark. And I feel like looking back on the situation that we went through, it kind of felt like something really dark came into our home, literally. And yet the presence and the light of Jesus never left our home. And so what needed to be revealed was revealed very quickly. And the light of Jesus, it still can penetrate darkness. It can bring light to the darkness. And when the things that are messy and have been shrouded in darkness are brought to light, it's really painful and it's really hard. And yet it's still the will of God. Those messy, hard things have to be brought to light. And so I think that my trust in God's protection has grown through that experience. And it's not a blind trust. Maybe it was more of a blind trust before, but a trust that even when things don't go the way you expect them to or would ever have wanted them to, that His goodness and protection are still present and they are still firm and trustworthy. And so I think after that season, we saw a lot of redemption happening even in the lives of the foster kids that were affected. And we both felt that it was worth it to continue, and that we're never going to be able to shield our kids from everything, but we can trust that God's protection is enough for them. Not that we don't want to be wise and very careful, and I think I'm more careful than I ever was, but I think it's still worth it because there are still kids coming out of dark places, and there are still kids that need to experience Jesus' love and the love of a family, even if it's just for a few weeks. I think it's still worth it because I don't want to live my life based on what feels safest or easiest. I really want to live my life poured out for Jesus to do the work that he's called us to do. And I want my children to live their lives that way. I don't want them to think that the path to joy is the safest and easiest path, because I don't believe it is. Following God and loving others and living a missional life, it doesn't come without costs. It doesn't come without painful parts.
The only way I know how to describe it is to love somebody that's not your own in a way that felt like I was really loving them like my own, but I didn't have to, there was no obligation, but to be able to love them unconditionally and to give them the best that I had for whatever amount of time that was. And hoping and praying that would somehow change their lives. Yeah, but it felt like we were stepping into a really hard place, and it was a sacrifice. It was hard. There were really, really hard things that happened while we had kids. But I think like Jesus, it's like we don't regret a minute of it. We do it all over. I think he'd hang on the cross for us all over again if he had to. And we asked ourselves, that question after we went through that really hard experience in our home. Are we being negligent to allow that in our home and allow the possibility of something happening to them? And at the end, it wasn't easy to get there, but I think we had to say, we do it because God did it for us. They're worth it.
It says in Deuteronomy 10:17, "For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. And you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt." And I think it's so beautiful that from the very beginning, when God set apart his people, he set his people apart to be a people who loved the foreigner, who reached out to love and clothe and give food to those people who didn't have a place among them. And that is the inheritance, and that is the identity that God has created and placed on us as believers, because his heart is for those people who are oppressed, those people who find themselves without a home. His heart is for us to be rescuers and to be people who come alongside families and people who find themselves in hard situations. So it's been real sweet to memorize this together and to talk to the kids about, hey guys, this is what we did. We loved on these children who came as foreigners, who came from other countries. And you guys did this. You shared your meals with them, and you shared your toys with them, and they did such a good job sharing their toys. And you gave up your beds for them, and you shared your clothes with them, and you loved on them, because this is the heart of God, to love those people who find themselves in a hard situation. One of my friends reminded me of the last line from the musical Les Mis, which is, "To love another person is to see the face of God." And I love that line and that thought, because I think it's so true. People are made in the image of God, and when we love them and we see that life in their eyes and that uniqueness that he imbued into each individual, and we get to reach out and love to them, that is the face of God that we're seeing. And so I feel like in so many ways it has strengthened my faith of just seeing, the goodness of God in these people's lives and these children's lives and our family. I think sometimes when we hear about the immigrant crisis at the border and the numbers of people coming in, it can evoke fear for people that we're losing our jobs or losing our culture or different things. But in my experience between the Latino families that I've been in relationship with in clinic for years, these are families very much like ours. Latino culture is very family-oriented. They love children, they love families, and these families are here because of situations in their home countries, making it very difficult for them to continue to live there. They love their home countries and they love their cultures, and if they could live and thrive there safely, I believe they would. But there are a lot of different reasons why people come to our country, and most of these immigrants that are coming up, they're just families. They're very much like you and I.
I don't know all the ins and outs of our immigration system very well, and probably most people don't, if they were to be honest. But yeah, I mean, I think to get a green card or something like that is taking people 10 years. Like, it's just, nobody can wait that long. Like, that's a failure on our part as the U.S. to provide safe legal entry. And I realize that not everybody would make it or should make it, but the fact that we just don't have a very viable path at the moment lends itself to what's happening. And I can't fault them for that, because they're literally leaving such desperate situations that, I mean, I would probably do the same thing if I was in their shoes. To know the faces and to see the people and to understand what they're really coming from should change your perspective on what you believe about a policy or a law that has been enacted, because it's not just an article in a law or some policy that a bunch of people in Washington created. And I know that a lot of those were created with great thought, but we all know that a lot of them were created with not a lot of great thought, or short-sighted or whatever. And, people are doing the best they can, and there's a lot that needs still to be done. But at the end of the day, these are real people. Like, they're human beings. They're real faces with real names.
God cares more about his people, his image bearers, than he does our human constructs and definitions. That should affect how we think about borders and how we think about refugees coming into our countries.
If we're truly living with an eternal kingdom perspective, then Jesus should be the one that we align our hearts with, and his heart is for people, regardless of race, color, ethnicity, country of origin, whatever it may be. He loves all of us and would want us to be for people, whatever that looks like.
So unfortunately, we were informed a few weeks ago that our program was getting shut down. We're not exactly sure all the reasoning behind that. I think some of it is probably financial.
So we started in April of 2021 with our first kid, and we had our last set of kids in January of 2023. In that 2-year period, we had 21 kids come through our home. We'll probably never get to know what happens to any of these kids, where they end up. I hope so many of them, end up going to school, getting college degrees, and making incredible lives for themselves. And I unfortunately will probably never get a chance to know what part we played in that. But I believe that God's got a story, and he's using us to write part of theirs.
I had 2 different moms that reached out to me after their child was able to be reunited with them, thanking me for being a mom to their daughter during this time. And that just really hit home for me, that this is just another mom who was in a really hard situation and had to trust a random American mom with her most precious daughter, for one of them for almost 4 months. And so it just felt so much like we're just moms together, loving on children and hoping the best for them and wanting to take care of them. And so it was really sweet. Those moms who sent a text to the social worker who forwarded it on to me, thanking me for caring for their child. I will just continue to pray for their lives wherever they are, that He would just continue to pursue their hearts, and that they would just know the love of a Father who pursues His children through all the twists and turns of life and through all the hard and painful parts of life, and sticks with us and doesn't promise things to be perfect or easy, but He promises to stick with us.
He has called us to be His hands and feet, to love the least of these, the broken. And we know that there are those people all around us. And so now that this program has ended for us, we're going to have to start looking for that and praying, okay, God, what's next? Where can we be involved? How can we be your hands and feet? And what is the impact that you want us to have in Waco or around the world next?
There really is so much suffering happening in the world today. It's easy to react to that by wanting to either ignore that it's happening or to respond by turning inward and trying to protect our own world as we know it. Listening to this story challenges me to think about suffering in the world in a different way, to look at it from God's perspective. Each human life is made in God's image. He loves each person who is suffering in the same way that He loves me. What if it was me who was fleeing from violence? What if it was my girls who needed a place to go? Wouldn't I want someone to care for us in this way? It challenges me to look outside of myself and my own situation to those who are in vulnerable places. How does God want me to think about these people and these difficult situations? How would He want me to be involved? What is His heart? And as a follower of Jesus, how am I invited to respond?
If I don't do it all, if I don't do it right, if I don't measure up, I won't be accepted by others, by Christians, by God, by my family. No one tells you have to perform to fit in, or you have to be perfect, but those are just things that you pick up from experience or from your own wounds, being hurt, not wanting to get in trouble. You pick that up, and I carried that heavy lie very deeply for a long time.
In our next episode, Dana Grindle shares about growing up in a military family and moving around a lot. Because of this lifestyle, she learned early on how to fit in and play by the rules to be accepted in a new environment. Living this way had a massive effect on how she related to God as well, always feeling like she had to perform to keep Him happy. But God used one extreme injury to realign her body, her mind, and her soul. Our next episode is called Misaligned.
Hi, my name is Emmy Blakely, and I'm from Orange County, California. I love Story Partners because I think the best way to introduce people to Jesus is by sharing stories of how He has shown Himself to be real in our own lives. Story Partners offers a platform to amplify some of these powerful stories far beyond their normal reach. Story Partners is a nonprofit ministry that tells stories that point to Jesus. We tell these stories through short documentary films, as well as this podcast. We're a crowdfunded ministry funded by monthly giving from people like me. To learn more or to join our crowdfunding community, visit us at storypartners.org.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Story Partners podcast. This story was recorded and edited by Walt and Annie Manus. If you were encouraged by it, we hope you'll share it with a friend. We'll see you next time.